Welcome to tonight's special edition of Media One-on-One. I'm Perry Parks, your host, and tonight's moderator, immigration and population pressures continue to be one of the biggest issues and concerns for both the United States and Mexico. It presents problems for all people, but especially for those in border states. Opinion research conducted in Los Angeles for the Center for National Policy shows that the public generally believes Mexican immigrants are greatly attracted to the United States by special social welfare benefits. Joining us in our discussion are two experts on the subject, the Ambassador of Mexico and to the U.S., the Honorable Jesus Silva Herzog, and the American Ambassador to Mexico, the Honorable James Jones. Ambassador Silva was appointed to Mexico as Mexico's ambassador to the United States in December of 1994. He is the author of several books on and articles on economic and the economic and financial fields. From 1982 to 1986, he served as Mexico's Minister of Finance and Public Credit. Ambassador Jones was sworn in as U.S. Ambassador to Mexico in 1993. Prior to that, he was Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the American Stock Exchange. From 1973 to 1987, Ambassador Jones was a member of Congress from Oklahoma. Also with us tonight is an audience of Southern California citizens who we encourage to interact with our distinguished guests. Let's start off our talk about the causes of out-migration from Mexico to the United States. What is really on the Mexican side of the border, what is really pushing people to migrate, often illegally and sometimes at great personal risk to the U.S.? And can we assume that Mexicans, like Americans, would rather not move away from their homes and families and their country? Ambassador, what is the view from the Mexican side of the border on that issue?
Well, definitely we believe that the migration problem is a very complex problem. It's one that has historical roots. It has economic, social reasons of why it happens in the way it happens. But basically what we are faced with, it's a structural problem between the United States and Mexico. Mexico has an excess supply of labor. It has had an excess supply of labor for a number of years. And the important point is that the United States has a demand for that labor. So we are encountered with a labor market in which on the one side there is an excess and in the other side there is a demand. Of course, Mexico would rather prefer for our citizens to stay in Mexico. But we haven't been able in the last few years to offer the new employment opportunities because of a number of reasons, but basically because our economic development has not been sufficiently dynamic to absorb the growth in the labor force in the Mexican society.
Ambassador Jones.
Well, I would give two primary reasons for the push of migration from Mexico to the United States. And these are anecdotal reasons that I've gotten from visits along the border on a regular basis, talking to mostly young men, mostly skilled young men who are waiting to cross the border in illegal fashion. The two reasons are, number one, jobs, without any question. They're looking for employment. They're looking for a chance to help send some money back to their families. And a second major reason is family itself. As you know, the largest percentage of immigrants to the United States right now are from Mexico. Of those who are undocumented, more than half are presumed to be from Mexico. And there's been an increase where there's something like 7 million Mexicans who are Mexican Americans or Mexicans waiting to become citizens who are there legally, here legally. And so the other reason is to join family. And the other part of your question is the family situation. The family structure in Mexico is very, very strong. And I find over and over again as I go around Mexico the desire that families stay together where they come from. And if the economic opportunities were there, the demand or the push to go find a job in the United States clearly would not be there, because they would prefer to be with their families in their home area.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about jobs. That most of the Mexicans migrating to the United States are young adults and presumably can't find good jobs at home. I wonder, I guess the question I have, is this a reflection, if this trend actually spans a number of years and it's a reflection of the population trends and maybe the birth rate and other issues that keep pushing the oversupply of potential laborers that then ultimately, given no jobs in Mexico, have to move north in order to find jobs? Is the population trends a part of this particular dynamic as well, historically?
Without any doubt. Mexico has been a country with a relatively high rate of demographic growth in the last decades, even though we have been quite successful in the reduction of that population growth. But the problem is that labor force, the ones that were born 15 or 20 years ago, are still growing at a very fast rate, 3% per year, which is too high for the rate of economic development that we have had in the last 2 decades. The migration push was significantly reduced during the late 70s and early 80s, when the Mexican economy was growing at over 8% per year in real terms. So that is a very clear indication that the only real solution to the migration problem, it's on the one hand to find someone else in the United States to perform the type of activities that the Mexican migrants do at this moment, and basically to stimulate economic development in Mexico.
Well, I agree with the general analysis that Ambassador Silva Herzog has made. Mexico is a country of a little over 92 million people. Over half are under age 20. So there is this enormous bulge in population increases. They have it on a declining basis now, but you have all of these young people in their most energetic years, their potentially most productive years, wanting to enter the marketplace, the workforce. And so that is a major problem. It's been estimated, I think, by the World Bank that Mexico, in order to keep up with the new entrants into the labor force, has to create 1 million jobs a year. And that means from 1985 to 1995, they should have created 10 million jobs. Instead, they only created 2 million jobs. So you have an 8 million job shortfall. Right. And so that's part of the problem. But you have to also put Mexico's modern economic development into context. And it's only been 10 years since Mexico truly became or joined the World Economic Competitive Community by joining what is now the World Trade Organization. And so while I think they're definitely on the right track to sustained and impressive real rates of growth, the fact is they have a lot of catching up to do, and right now the pressure is on these young people to find jobs, and they're not in Mexico.
Ambassador, is the fact that the jobs are down and the fact that you have so many young people that are looking for work, does the migration north act as kind of a release valve to control social pressures in Mexico? Therefore, it might not be in your country's best interest to look at how to control migration across the border illegally? Is there any substance to that thought?
Well, we definitely are not in the position of controlling the movement of the Mexican people inside the country or outside the country. It's a constitutional mandate to give the Mexican people complete freedom of movement within the country and outside of the country, so we are not going to do that. But there is no question that the migration has very important economic benefits for Mexico, especially for small communities where most of the migrants come from. The remittances that they send back to Mexico are an important source of income for those communities. It is not that important if you take it into the whole Mexican economy, but regionally or locally, it's quite a significant contribution of the Mexican migrants that come to this country, especially when you take into account that many of them do not stay in the United States. They come here, they work in different states of the Union, and then they go back to Mexico. So it has an economic importance without any doubt.
Ambassador Jones.
Well, the migration trends and patterns in Mexico are very much like the migration trends and patterns in the United States roughly 50, 60 years ago, when we went from an agrarian economy to an urban economy. And what you see in Mexico is the movement generally out of the rural areas, the more remote areas, into the larger cities, which is one of the reasons Mexico City has grown so rapidly to 22 million people today. And the problem has been in the last few years, job growth has not kept up with the increases in population in the urban areas, and therefore they go further north. So I think it's a normal pattern that we've been through in our own country, and the difference is the cities were the escape valve in the United States, and they're not exactly the escape valve for normal patterns of migration in Mexico.
Well, let me ask you this question as a follow-up to that, Ambassador Jones. There's a lot of hue and cry in the press and in the general public about trying to close down the border. Can the United States effectively close down the border and not expect to have some kind of adverse impact on their own economy in those border states?
Well, I think it's impossible, given our value system, to militarize the border and to actually close it down. The best way to actually decrease and if not stop illegal migration are two things. Number one is to go after the employers in the United States who are illegally hiring people who do not have documentation to work here. And number two is to work with Mexico through the North American Free Trade Agreement and other investment activities to increase job opportunities and economic opportunities in Mexico. If you'll recall the debate on the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, nobody said that was going to cut off the demand and the push for migration to the United States in the initial stages. But as Mexico gained investment, as it gained job opportunities, it would be the ultimate answer, and I think that still is going to be the case.
Many of the people in the U.S. hear about the so-called economic miracle in South Korea and several Southeast Asian countries. They wonder why Mexico's development strategies have not created a similar economic miracle and enough jobs to absorb the country's burgeoning population. Is there any effective strategy in place today that is likely to increase jobs and opportunities in proportion to the population growth?
That's a very simplistic statement. If you look backwards, Mexico has had one of the best records of economic development in the last 50 years among all the developing countries in the world. During the middle of the 40s to the middle of the 70s, Mexico was growing at over 6% per year in real terms with price and monetary stability. So there were many people that were talking during those years about the Mexican miracle. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, Mexico was doing better than most of the Asian tigers. We were growing at more than 8.4% in real terms. Now, recently, we have been facing a number of problems that are probably difficult to explain given our time limitations. But we have had a very severe crisis at the end of 1994. We have had one of our most severe recessions in the last 70 years during 1995. But let me tell you that we are coming out and that now the Mexican economic recovery, it's better and sooner than nobody had expected before. So definitely we have a strategy, an economic development strategy in place, and we are confident